At the height of the Second World War, Adolf Hitler controlled almost the entirety of continental Europe. France had fallen, Poland had been crushed. Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, all conquered. The map of Nazi-controlled territory in 1942 was a single, unbroken sheet of darkness stretching from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow. And right in the middle of it, like a hole punched through the center of the page, sat a tiny country that Hitler never touched. Switzerland, completely surrounded, no allies within reach. A population of barely 4 million people in a country you could drive across in a few hours. Hitler called it a pimple on the face of Europe. Joseph Goebbels called it a stinking little state. The German military drew up a full invasion plan, Operation Tannenbaum, with up to 500,000 troops earmarked to attack from 2 directions. Heinrich Himmler even discussed who would be appointed commissioner of the conquered Swiss territory. And yet, the order was never given. The tanks never rolled. The borders were never crossed. Switzerland remained untouched through the entire war. And for that matter, through every European war for the past 500 years. So the question is not just how, the question is why. What did this tiny mountain country have that made it, and it alone, not worth attacking? If you enjoy history that digs under the surface, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel. Now, the most common answer to this question is the Alps, mountains, natural fortress, end of story. And that answer is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. Norway has fjords. Greece has mountains. Afghanistan is one of the most rugged countries on earth. All of them were invaded anyway. Mountains alone do not stop armies. What stopped armies from invading Switzerland was not one thing. It was 5 things, layered on top of each other across 5 centuries, forming a defensive system so complete that no invader ever concluded the prize was worth the price. Let's start with the first layer, and it begins with a catastrophe. In the early 1500s, Switzerland was not neutral at all. It was one of the most feared military powers in Europe. Swiss mercenaries were legendary disciplined pikemen who had humiliated the armies of Burgundy, the Holy Roman Empire, and half of Italy. Kings hired Swiss soldiers because Swiss soldiers won battles. Switzerland was aggressive, expansionist, and very, very good at war. Then came the Battle of Marignano. In September of that year, a Swiss army met the forces of France and Venice in northern Italy. And this time, the Swiss lost. Badly. Roughly 10,000 Swiss soldiers were killed in a single 16-hour battle. The myth of Swiss invincibility was destroyed in a day. And Switzerland, surrounded by France, Austria, and the Italian states, all larger, all more powerful, made a decision that would define it for the next 5 centuries. If we cannot beat the great powers, we will never fight them again. We will stay out of every war, defend only our own borders, and make ourselves useful enough to everyone that nobody has a reason to attack us. That was not cowardice. That was arithmetic. And it was the foundation of everything that followed. The second layer came 300 years later. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Switzerland, proving that neutrality alone, without the means to enforce it, is just a piece of paper. Napoleon absorbed Switzerland into his empire, reorganized its cantons, and used it as a corridor for his armies. The Swiss learned a brutal lesson. Neutrality is only as strong as the force behind it. But when Napoleon fell, something remarkable happened. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, the great powers of Europe, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, formally declared Switzerland's perpetual neutrality. And they did it not out of generosity, but out of self-interest. Switzerland sat at the exact geographical crossroads between France and Austria. A neutral Switzerland was a buffer zone that prevented those 2 rivals from ever sharing a border. The great powers didn't protect Swiss neutrality because they liked the Swiss. They protected it because a neutral Switzerland kept the peace in the center of Europe. Switzerland's neutrality was bolted into the architecture of the continent. That was the second layer. Neutrality was no longer just a Swiss policy. It was a European security arrangement. But here is where Switzerland diverged from every other neutral country in history, and this is the critical difference. Most neutral countries, when they commit to neutrality, gradually disarm. They reduce their military, cut their budgets, and rely on the goodwill of their neighbors. Denmark did exactly this, and it fell in 2 hours. Switzerland did the exact opposite. It armed itself to the teeth. Since the founding of the Swiss Confederation in 1291, every able-bodied male citizen has been required to serve in the military. Not a professional army, a militia. The citizen-soldier tradition goes back to the medieval peasants who picked up pikes and defeated the Habsburgs. By the 20th century, this system meant that every Swiss man completed military training, was issued a rifle, kept that rifle at home, and could be called up at a moment's notice. Switzerland could mobilize roughly 500,000 trained soldiers within 48 hours from a population of just over 4 million. That is not a country with an army, that is an army with a country. And the rifle in every home was not ceremonial. Swiss marksmanship was legendary. Annual shooting competitions were a national tradition. These were not parade ground soldiers. These were farmers, engineers, and factory workers who could put a bullet through a target at 300 meters before breakfast and then go back to making watches. Now here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because everything I have described so far is just the preparation. The real masterstroke came in the summer of 1940 when the walls were closing in and Switzerland faced its most dangerous moment since Napoleon. France had just surrendered. Italy was already in the war on Germany's side. Switzerland was now completely surrounded by Axis powers. Every border, every direction, every horizon. There was no ally coming, no rescue, no escape route. And the German military was openly planning Operation Tannenbaum. This is when General Henri Guisan did something that no other military commander in Europe had the courage or the imagination to do. On the 25th of July, 1940, he summoned the entire Swiss officer corps to a meadow called the Rutli the Legendary Spot, where, according to tradition, the Swiss Confederation had been founded in 1291. Standing on that symbolic ground, Guisan delivered a speech that changed the war for Switzerland. He told his officers that Switzerland would resist any invasion, that if they ran out of ammunition, they would fight with bayonets, that any broadcast announcing a Swiss surrender was to be treated as enemy propaganda and ignored. And then he unveiled his strategy, the National Redoubt, the Redoubt. The plan was breathtaking in its ruthlessness. Guisan accepted that Switzerland could not defend its borders against the German army. The flat northern plateau, where most of the population lived, where the cities were, where the factories stood, would be abandoned. The Swiss army would retreat into the Alps, into a chain of fortified mountain positions that had been prepared for exactly this moment. Tunnels carved into solid granite, artillery batteries hidden inside what looked like ordinary wooden chalets, bunkers built into cliff faces, supply depots stocked for months of independent resistance. Over 8,000 fortified positions across the Alpine chain. But the true genius of the Redoubt was not what the Swiss would defend, it was what they would destroy. Every bridge on every road leading into the Alpine interior was rigged with explosives. Every railway tunnel, including the Gotthard Tunnel, the single most important rail link between northern and southern Europe, was packed with demolition charges. Mountain passes were engineered to trigger artificial landslides that would bury roads under thousands of tons of rock. Over 3,000 demolition sites were prepared across the country. Some sources say nearly 5,000. Engineers designed bridges with hollow support columns specifically to make them easier to pack with explosives. The message to Hitler was devastatingly simple. You can have the cities, you can have the farmland, but the moment you cross our border, we will destroy every tunnel, every bridge, every pass, and every railway in the Alps. You will not get the Gotthard, You will not get a functioning transit route between Germany and Italy. You will get rubble, mountains full of armed men who know every rock and every path, and a guerrilla war that will bleed you for years. We would rather burn our own country to the ground than let you use it. No other country in Europe made that threat. And no other country in Europe had the infrastructure, the military system, and the national will to carry it out. But there was a fifth layer, the darkest one, and the one most people don't want to talk about. Switzerland was not just too costly to invade, it was too useful to invade. Swiss banks did business with both sides during the war. German gold, including gold looted from conquered nations, and horrifyingly from Holocaust victims, was laundered through Swiss financial institutions. Swiss factories produced precision instruments, machine tools, and armaments components that Germany needed. Swiss railways transported goods that kept the Axis supply chain functioning. A neutral, intact Switzerland was an economic asset to the German war machine. An invaded, destroyed Switzerland was a pile of useless rubble. Hitler wanted Switzerland conquered. His generals kept telling him the same thing. Not yet, not now. The cost is too high and the benefit too low. We can get what we need from the Swiss without firing a shot. Leave them for later, after we have won everything else. And later, of course, never came. So let's answer the question directly. Why was Switzerland never invaded? Not for one reason. For five, stacked on top of each other across 500 years. The trauma of Marignano taught the Swiss that neutrality was the only viable strategy for a small country surrounded by great powers. The Congress of Vienna turned that neutrality into a European security arrangement that the great powers themselves had an interest in maintaining. The militia system created an armed population that could mobilize 500,000 soldiers in days, making invasion extremely costly in lives and time. The National Redoubt turned the Alps into a fortress and promised to destroy every piece of valuable infrastructure the moment an invader crossed the border. And the dark pragmatism of Swiss banking and industry made the country more valuable intact than conquered. Each layer alone might not have been enough. Mountains didn't save Norway. Neutrality didn't save Denmark. A strong military didn't save France. Economic usefulness didn't save Czechoslovakia. But all five together created a defensive equation that no invader, not Napoleon's heirs, not the Kaiser, not Hitler, ever concluded was worth solving. And there is a bitter irony buried in this story that connects it directly to the country we talked about last time. Denmark and Switzerland both declared neutrality. Both were small countries in the shadow of a much larger, much more dangerous neighbor. But Denmark stripped its military down to almost nothing and hoped that not provoking Germany would be enough. Switzerland armed every household, fortified every mountain, and wired every bridge to explode. Denmark fell in 2 hours. Switzerland was never touched. The lesson is uncomfortable, but it is clear. Neutrality is a policy. It is not a defense. It only works when the country behind it has made the cost of violation so catastrophic that no aggressor is willing to pay it. Switzerland understood this. Denmark did not. And that difference, not geography, not luck, not size, is why one of them woke up occupied and the other never did. If this made you rethink what neutrality actually means, hit like. It genuinely helps the channel. Subscribe for more history that digs under the surface instead of skating over it. And tell us in the comments, was Switzerland genuinely brave? Or was it just playing both sides? We read every answer. See you in the next one.